Good old-fashioned camp slasher. It's like chicken soup for the soul. So Fear Street Part 2, 1978 tells the story of Camp Nightwing as kids and counselors alike are chased by an axe-wielding madman. Well, we're back, everybody. Part 2 of Fear Street in this trilogy release of movies on Netflix. If you have not seen my review, or if you've not seen the actual movie itself of Fear Street Part 1, 1994, the review's already up. I'll put a little card up here. This is actually the second part of a trilogy of movies based off of the R.L. Stine novels. It's coming all this month of July on Netflix. This one, 1978, drops in 2 days on Friday, and the final part of 1666 drops the following Friday. So if you're not already on this, if you're a Fear Street fan, if you're a horror fan, a slasher fan, any of the above, get on it, because it's a pretty cool series so far. So coming into the second chapter of this trilogy, Fear Street 1978, I had a few expectations. One, my expectations as far as the characters and some of the writing had been tempered down from some of my issues with the first part, but I also expected the nostalgia side of things, the more, making it feel like the era of the late 70s. I felt like this was probably going to have an easier time and probably a more successful time doing that than they did in 1994. The 90s, for some reason, are always so hard for people to truly capture on film yet. I guess it's just not nostalgic enough yet. But 1978, great music, great atmosphere. You have the classic camp counselor, camp slasher setting that we have in movies like The Burning and Sleepaway Camp and Friday the 13th. I mean, quite literally like the quintessential birthplace of horror slashers coming back for the aesthetic of this second chapter. And you get a little bit more origins into the character that we met at the end of the first part, who is the only sole survivor of this witch's terror over Shadyside. So starting off with the positives for Part 2, 1978, pretty much all of my expectations came true as far as what was going to be right with this. I thought that the camp counselor slasher setting aesthetic that was going on was actually really cool. I think that they captured a lot of what we love about that genre, both good and bad. It's very hard to make a camp slasher and avoid some of the downfalls of that subgenre in and of itself. But I thought that for a fan of that subgenre, like the Friday the 13th movies, like The Burning, they did a lot here to kind of hone in on what we like about that. The setting, the different drama going on between the kids and the counselors alike, which was very prevalent in movies like Sleepaway Camp. And of course, with the madman himself, with the killer going around, there is a good amount of gore here. There's a good amount of slashing, a good amount of chopping, and a whole lot of carnage candy, just like in the first chapter, if that is what you are here for. I even took it a step further whenever I was watching this with my family on 4th of July. We actually camped out in the backyard, put a tent up, did s'mores and a fire and all that good stuff. And around 11 o'clock, when it was pitch black out and we were surrounded by crickets and still a few fireworks, we threw on Part 2, 1978 and watched this in the tent. So I even tried my best to kind of really hone into that camp slasher atmosphere, and we all had a really good time, with the exception of my youngest, who fell asleep in 2 minutes, which, to be honest, I expected. And that's the only reason why I turned it on, because I knew she was about to be out. And again, like I expected, the aesthetic of 1978, that nostalgia vibe that they're going for, from the soundtrack to the clothes to the dialogue, and just kind of that atmosphere of the late 70s, early 80s, they do a much better job at nailing that here than they did in 1994 in the first one, where that one just kind of felt like they had a great soundtrack and a lot of modern kids acting like they were in the 90s. It was pretty believable that some of these kids were in the 70s.
Looks like blood.
Do you have a better idea?
Maybe.
And the best part, the most successful part of that is the soundtrack yet again. It's a great soundtrack. I would say this one's even better than 1994. There's a lot of songs here. One could probably argue maybe too many songs, like they're trying to hammer that nostalgia button a little bit too hard. But I love classic rock. I love 70s rock. So every single song that came on, I knew it. Every single song I started to sing along. And predominantly, most of them really do add something to the scene, especially like Don't Fear the Reaper. It just kind of gives that whole foreboding sense of what's about to go down in this chapter. In my final positive, I do like the relationship that's developed throughout this movie of the two sisters. You have one that's the really goody two-shoes girl. She's the virgin. She's the one that never swears. And then you have quite the opposite with the other one, who is played by the girl from Stranger Things season 2 and 3, to where she's very much the outcast of the camp. She's the Angela, for those of you that are fans of Sleepaway Camp. She's the ones that everybody's always shitting on and always calling names and trying to prank, but she's got attitude to her. She pranks back, she fights back, and I really liked her character especially. But those two sisters, their relationship develops throughout this movie to where they're very kind of spiteful towards each other, and they're very antagonistic, and by the end they really do have to come together and defeat this evil together. You get the off the side of the tracks one that gets grounded a little bit more, that's trying to do good. You get the one that's a little bit too goody two-shoes, that's starting to get a little bit more grounded and get off of her high horse a bit. So I liked how that relationship developed and where things ended up at the end of this one.
You swore. It's becoming a habit.
But unfortunately, I do think this second chapter was a pretty sizable step down from the first one. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be on an island with that. We'll find out in a couple of days when all the rest of you get to check this out. But I felt like pretty much all of my issues with the first chapter, I had bigger issues with those here. And even a lot more of a pacing issue overall, which is going to be my first negative. I felt like this really dragged. It was to the point where when it ended, I checked the running time to see if this was maybe like a 2-hour 15, 2-hour 20-minute chapter, and no, it's an hour and 40 minutes just like the last one, but it felt like half an hour longer. Just the movement of the story and the whole middle section of this film where the crazed madman with the axe is running around and he just pops up in random bunks and just chops people to death that we don't even really get a chance to know. It just felt like everything they were trying to do story-wise, character-wise, just really was drug out in this one, to the point where a lot of this movie, to be honest with you, I was a bit bored. Also gotta knock it for the carnage candy a bit. Now, while there is tons of blood, while there is a lot of people getting chopped up with an axe, and while there is, one or two moments where the gore is pretty excessive, where you're watching a guy's face get chopped up like 4 or 5 times, and you're watching one character get just gored to death with an axe, I don't feel like this has nearly the creativity that we got in the first one. I mean, everybody's been talking about that kill in the first chapter with the bread slicer and that chick getting split into like 9 little loaves of face. You don't have anything near that creative in this one. It's just an axe. Just axe kills. Just blood and skin with axe. And I've seen that. I've seen that dozens and dozens and dozens of times over. And if you're gonna bring something that's going to be a throwback, you need some creativity there. You need something that's going to be what we haven't gotten before in this subgenre, and I feel like they really dropped the ball on that here. Now, harkening back to some of my negatives with the first one that carries over into this one, the characters. I had a major issue with the characters in this one, where I was kind of mixed in the first one, where there was a couple characters I liked, a couple characters I didn't really care about. Aside from really the Stranger Things girl and her sister really was only the last 20 minutes of the movie that kind of won me over. I didn't like any of the characters in this. I didn't feel like any of them were engaging. I didn't think any of them were really somebody you could root for or somebody that you cared whether or not they got their head fucking chopped off with this axe. I felt like pretty much everybody in this one was expendable. There's a lot of characters that's just there for cannon fodder, so this guy can go through and chop them with an axe so you get no chance to meet and give no fucks to the fact that they're dead, no matter whether they're a counselor or a 12-year-old kid. But even the main characters, the recurring characters, the druggies, and we get yet again here that are kind of offsetting the main characters, knew nothing about them, cared nothing about them. But by the end of this second chapter, the thing that really stood out to me as an annoyance that I walked away as my last thoughts before the credits rolled is that this thing really relies on plot contrivances. I mean, there is just so many moments where a character just happened to show up in the right time, at the right place for something to happen. Even though you have this massive camp, they just happen to be there at that exact second. And even a plot thing at the end I'm not going to get into details with, where we flash back to our 1994 characters and they're able to retrieve this item. The second that they showed where they're able to retrieve this item for them, I literally said out loud, oh, bullshit. Now you're going to get some people that argue, hey, we're talking about a witch's curse and, slasher killers that are taken over by some kind of a spirit and all of that. Do you really have to talk about realism when you're talking about that level of supernatural? And I would say yes, I would say that even though we're dealing with the supernatural, you still have to have some tethers to reality. You still have to have some elements of your script that feels real. It doesn't feel like somebody's literally writing it on a page because they need A and B to connect. And when you have moments that are just such a stretch, that are just so convenient, it stood out to me, and I checked out. At every single one of those moments, I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So overall, guys, I would say this is worth watching, especially if you watched the first one. You definitely have to watch this one, and I'm going to cross my fingers that they close it out much better with the third chapter, but for me, this was a sizable step down. I feel like everything that this had the opportunity to do, they kind of took the easy way out and gave us the most cookie-cutter version of what we could have gotten, and really padded out that runtime where they could have had some creative kills or some interesting characters, and we just didn't get that here. So if you're on board already for this trilogy and you want to see where things went wrong in 1978, definitely check this thing out, but temper your expectations a lot from the first chapter. For everybody that maybe didn't care for the first one or doesn't really worry about what happened in this middle chapter, you might be able to just watch the recap and skip to the third one. But part 2 1978's barely gonna skate by with me telling you to stream it. So what do you guys think? Are you a fan of Fear Street 1978? Did this one match all of your expectations that were built up in the first chapter? Do you feel like this was actually better than the first chapter and you don't know what I'm talking about? Let me know all of your thoughts down below, and are you excited for part 3, 1666? Let me know all your thoughts down below on Fear Street, and we will talk about it. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button so you can check out this trilogy closed out next week with part 3, 1666, as well as all the other goodies that I have on this channel awaiting you. So please check all that out by hitting that subscribe button. Thank you as always for watching, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.